for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network and KGRA, the Global Radio Alliance.
I need your help to get to the year 1985.
You're listening to Fade to Black with Jimmy Church on the Game Changer Network.
Good evening. Fade to Black. Bespoke radio for the masses. Yeah, man. How you doing? It's Thursday, January 30th, 2020. 30 days into the new year, only 336 days left. We are live from a bunker that is somewhere in the middle of beautiful downtown Burbank, California. And I would like to welcome everybody listening all around the world, all across the United States. Hither and thither, to and fro, back and forth, up and down, east and west, north and south, far and near. This is Fade to Black for KJCR, the Game Changer Network, and KGRA, the planet. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. What is cracking, everybody? How you doing? How you doing? All right. Tonight, very special guest, James Fox, is here. He's the director of his new film, The Penomenon. This is our special event. Yesterday, we premiered the trailer for the film. That went worldwide, and we'll get it up here in Twitter in just a bit if you haven't seen it yet. And tonight, we're going to discuss the film. That's right. And at the top of the hour, we will have a very special surprise guest join us. And there you go. It's going to be a great night. It's always a huge event with when James has a new film coming out. And I'm excited. I've seen it. I've seen the film. I have seen the film. And yeah, it is all that. All right. Welcome back. Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, it is our James Fox special event featuring his film, The Phenomenon. Now, earlier this week, we did announce a super special surprise first-time guest tonight on the show that will be joining us. That guest was to be Christopher Mellon. Christopher is out of country with the flu. He's down for the count, but he will be on Fade to Black in the future. But that doesn't mean we don't have a special surprise super-duper guest, because James Fox today said, Jimmy, you just relax. I got this. Welcome back, James. How are you?
Thank you for having me on the show.
Thank you for accepting the invitation. What am I supposed to say to that, James?
Oh man, I tell you, I've been following the trailer spreading like wildfire around the world, and I've been having to sort of pinch myself because I can't believe it's happening. It's like 7 years, the better part of 7 years, pushing and shoving, and it was one of the most challenging, by a long shot, projects I've ever been involved with. I'm hoping at some point I'll be able to sleep for a month, but I often described it like, imagine you're in the ring with a monster, and this monster has you out-muscled, out-maneuvered, outperforms in every possible way, and you're just trying to survive another moment with this monster. That's what it's been like for the last 7 years with the phenomenon.
Well, and I want you to make a confession to the audience along with myself in that you and I have been in constant contact about this film over the last 3 or 4 years, and you have done. I will admit that you have done nothing but work, right? And you just your enthusiasm behind it. I don't know where you have found the energy, but here we are. You know,
I would often say, and I'm not kidding, there was one point where I was actually in the edit room with this other gentleman that helped edit, Lance Mungia, and
he's great.
I couldn't walk, and I was pushing myself so hard my body started to shut down, and I couldn't walk at all. So I was lying on my back on the edit room floor, and I'm kind of directing Lance, this go like this, and move over here. And I honestly thought I was on the verge of dying. And Lance looked over at me and he goes, "Dude, you need to go get help. Like, this is ridiculous." I'm like, I gotta keep pushing harder. He's like, "No, man, dude, this film's not gonna get done if you die. Like, go." I went to a chiropractor. I went to a massage therapist. I started taking Epsom ball. I couldn't walk, honestly. And I think it was like sitting in the edit room chair for 3.5 years, just staring at the screen and that monotonous movement back and forth.
Right.
Took a toll.
Well, now, just like anybody who has gotten really lucky with acclaim and criticism, like you have with Out of the Blue, and I Know What I Saw, where the standard for you is friggin' high. You've got to top those two films, and that's where we are at right now. Did you do it?
I am beyond happy with the outcome of this film. I wasn't 3 months ago. It was decent. It was like, I'd show it to people, they're like, "Oh, this is really powerful." But in the last 3 months, I had a bunch of screenings. We took extensive notes. We listened to our audience. We went back to the drawing board. We trimmed 30 minutes out. It flows, in my opinion, it flows like Niagara Falls now. I mean, it's really gripping. In fact, I have a gentleman I've been working with, Boris. He's an online editor, post-production. He calls himself the finisher. But he was doing color correction and some sound sweetening and stuff like that. And he sends me a text message just a few weeks ago. He goes, "Damn it, this film is so hard to work on." And I was thinking to myself, what is he talking about? And he goes, "It's so good, I keep forgetting that I'm trying to walk. I got to work."
Well,
so I've been working with him for 25 years. The first time he's ever said that at 5 films that I've made, 6 films that I've made. So I thought, well, this is a good sign.
Well, that's exactly the point. I am a film fanatic. I am a true fan. And I study film. And I lose interest very quickly, James. If the content could be great, but if the editing's a little bit off, if the cinematography isn't quite there, if there's not enough attention to the detail with production, my mind wanders. There's too much good content out there, and the ability to, and I'm talking about film studio quality productions, can be done if you take the time to do it, if that's what you want to do. But this community is always let down in that area, right? It's just, it's okay, but we need something.
I can give you.
We need something to represent.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
We need something to represent where we can sit back and go, see, all right, we've got this.
Let me tell you, the moment I realized I needed to up the ante. I worked really hard on Out of the Blue. We all did. And when it was finished, we sold it to NBC Universal, and I wasn't satisfied. I was like, this isn't the film that I imagined it would be. And the whole time it really bothered me, but we were out of steam. I think my online production guy, Boris Zubov, was literally in a fetal position crying. His wife's like, "You're killing my husband. Like, stop. This film is done." So I just kind of let it go, and it went out, and we sold it and made our money back, and, blah, blah, blah. 3 years went by, and the whole time I'm thinking that film wasn't the film I set out to make. 3 years went by. NBC Universal contacted me. We're not renewing the broadcast option. So I owned the film again. I went back to the drawing board, and I spent another 2 years on Out of the Blue. I re-released it, and that was much closer, but I still failed. Then I know what I saw, and I know what I saw. I remember I had a rough cut, and I was telling my investors, and you push and you push and you push and you push and you push, and then eventually the investors say, we're done here. You keep saying that, you need this much more money and then this much more money. And, when is this going to stop? We're done. And I said, we can't shop the film the way it is. It just doesn't look right. You wouldn't take a used car and sell it dirty. You'd get it detailed and just in color correction, audio sweetening, and, and they didn't, anyway, it went to Lionsgate, and Lionsgate owner loved it. I know what I saw. And it went in all the way up to acquisitions. And then the technical department looked at it, and they said, we're going to have to take a pass. This film isn't quite, it's not quite up to our standards. And so the production values are a little lackluster, and we're going to go ahead and take a pass. And it was such a devastating blow to me at the time, because I thought, I knew this was going to happen, and I just didn't have the resources and time to make it right. And so I said, I'll never make this mistake again. So when I started shooting this film, if I didn't have the money to do it right, I didn't do it. Until I had the money to hire lighting crews and audio guys, I brought in this guy, David West. He's a phenomenal photographer, National Geographic guy. And I wanted it to be beautiful. I wanted the production value to be really high. I wanted the music to be composed. I wanted, the color correction. Every little detail mattered. I brought in this guy, Mark Barish. He's one of the best writers. He's Harvard guy, super smart. He's, 1% of his work is UFOs. And he and I teamed up, and he's an incredibly good writer. I'm a decent writer. This guy is 10 notches above me. And he was over my shoulder the whole time putting this together. Jacques Vallee comes on board, grinding it out in the studio with us, weekend after weekend. We had a studio that had no running water, no toilet, and no internet. Okay, it was like the hole. I think we called it the cave. But Jacques would come out, and Jacques it's important to get it right. And Jacques a stickler, but he's right. And to have all of those forces and all that creativity and all that support, gave birth to the Phenomenon. And I'm really, really proud of it. And I'm really proud of all the people that were involved to get it to where it is.
I was reading through a lot of the comments online from people that were watching the trailer and commenting on that. And I think the majority are like, okay, I can't wait. This is great. It looks amazing. And people are impressed with that, as they should be. And then there's the other comments, which are equally as valid. Is there going to be anything new here that is presented? Or is it going to be just more of the same for us in the UFO community? I have seen the film, and I'm here to tell you, I learned a lot from this film. And that's a very difficult thing to do, isn't it? And what did you go through to select and find and get this research done to have something fresh to bring to the table?
I could honestly give you a 3-hour interview on every single clip that we found, historical clip, right down to the 1978 United Nations footage that Lee Spiegel put together with, Jacques Vallee and Dr. Jalen Hynek and Coyne. The pilot, I think it was 1975, had it in dramatic encounter. But in any case, that footage, Lee Spiegel organized the event. He put it on. He didn't have it. There was no footage.
I never saw that footage before. That blew me away. Blew me away. Al Chop in the radar room the night of 1952 when the Capitol building was buzzed. That's incredibly rare footage. That was Tom Tullian with Project Sign. It was a miracle. He came on board because of Jacques.
There was, Nash and Fortenberry, that famous 1952 sighting where those discs, flew under the airplane. Having testimony from him, it really brought that to life. We found footage at the Truman Library that no one's ever seen. Footage of Jacques that he'd never seen. And that was really important to me because I'm like, look, I understand that I'm going to have to give a history lesson because if we achieve our goal and penetrate a much broader audience, they're not going to have the foundation, the understanding of the phenomenon prior to this. There's no way they're going to believe a landing happened in Africa at the end of the film. No way. So I had to do an educational, historical perspective, but I didn't want to do the same old rehash stuff. I wanted to find a fresh new spin. Like, look, we cover Kenneth Arnold, but we got his daughter talking about it, and all the documents and photographs and letters of correspondence between him and the Air Force that happened in 1947, stuff that's never been seen or heard of, ever. And so that is the approach that we took with the phenomenon.
And tonight, right before I brought you on, I announced to everybody that our super secret special surprise guest tonight, first-time guest, was going to be Christopher Mellon. And for you to be able to sit down and have very open conversations with Chris, because he has been in the background. He's been out there, been in the background, but we haven't heard from him directly. You had the opportunity to do that. Did you hold back, or did you go straight at the questions that you needed to with Chris? Because his part in the film is pretty extraordinary.
We spent several months, and again, I could go into great detail on every interview that we secured because every interview was a miracle. I mean, it got within minutes of cancellation, even down to Senator Harry Reid. But that was so precarious, so tenuous. A miracle that we pulled that off. And with Christopher Mellon, I went right into his efforts to access what the government knows, the evidence. I just focused on that aspect of his position, his level of access that he has. I didn't realize, and this is one of the things we reveal in the film, and he reveals it himself, I didn't realize what a large role he played in getting those tapes that ended up in the front page of the New York Times out of the Pentagon. That was Christopher Mellon. Christopher Mellon is the one that went to the New York Times and a host of others and tried to figure out where he was going to break the story. They found a loophole. They bent the rules a little bit, and they got those materials out of the Pentagon. I didn't know that, and that was Christopher Mellon. And I also didn't realize, this is another really cool thing. Excuse me, if you need me to shut up, just tell me.
Sure, no, go.
Please. I also didn't realize there was a really cool discovery when we got together, because in the 90s I was interviewing Mercury astronaut Gordon Cooper about that infamous landing that happened at Edwards Air Force Base circa 1957, in which they captured this disc that landed on the dry lake bed back in 1957, with 16 millimeters or something. And I was interviewing Mercury astronaut about that, and I brought that up many times in several films because I think it's very significant. Like, that's pretty compelling evidence that's been hidden from us. And I brought it up with Harry Reid, phenomenal response. And then, for some reason, I don't know, I just brought it up with Christopher Mellon. Well, it turns out during the Clinton administration, Christopher Mellon, in an official capacity, went after that footage with the Air Force. Like, we know this, Phil. I believe that Mercury astronaut Gordon Cooper even came to the White House and talked about it with President Clinton. And he got the green light. Christopher Mellon got the green light to go after it. So while I was interviewing Gordon Cooper in the 90s, Christopher Mellon was going after the very footage that I was, it was just like this crazy coincidence, and so that made it into the film.
Now, I want to ask you on a personal level, when to have John Mack, first off, to see him on screen like that in high def is pretty incredible. But to see the children at such a young age and to have them share their accounts and the drawings and all of those things. Watch the film. It's there's no spoilers here. I'm not giving anything up. But for you to have the opportunity to go back and see them as adults and speak about their impact of what they went through for the last 25 years. For you, what did that do?
You know, it was so funny. Randall Knickers, I think it is. He's doing a film, Aerial Phenomena. I believe that's what it's called. Correct me if I'm wrong out there, you guys. But he's been doing this film, I think, for 10 years. He deserves a lot of credit. He was very instrumental in putting me in touch with the witnesses today and helping me organize that. I had to fight like tooth and nail to get one of my funders at the time, because he kept going, you know, oh, you mean to tell me a UFO landed in Africa and the beans got, come on. Like, I'm like, no, look at the archive footage. Because we had to pay to fly everybody in from all around the world and then put them up, and then they're per diem and really expensive. And I kept saying, please listen to me. I'm telling you, just look at this archive material. It'll be worth it. These guys have never been brought together in 20 years. Please, like, begging and pleading. Anyway, it finally happened. They came in from all different corners, and it turned out that a lot of them had been standing next to each other during the encounter. It's like, and they hadn't seen each other in years, like almost 2 decades. And to hear their accounts, and there were things that, unfortunately, you know, that ended up on the edit room floor, and I don't know why, but sometimes it just works out that way. But one of the things that astonished me the most was that, they said, if you've ever been out in the wilderness and you come across you have a pretty rare sighting of a wild animal, and it's like there's this moment of curiosity and intrigue and mystery, and the animals stopped and you're stopped and you're looking into each other's eyes, and there's just like time stops and freezes, and it's like a totally benign experience, but there's this curiosity and mystery. And they said that's what it was like with the beings. And there were these that didn't make it into the film. Why, I don't know. It just didn't. And then the other thing was, this is the things that moved me profoundly at the time, was there were these logs that would define the perimeter of the playground in Africa, in Rua, Zimbabwe, aerial school. And the children weren't allowed to go beyond that because the grass wasn't mowed and there were dangerous snakes and spiders and whatnot. So they would define the outer perimeter of the playground with these logs. And of course, children being children, they would dance along the logs, as far as long as you can go. And these little beings, according to the children, now adults, were saying that they were merrily dancing, floating next to them as the children skipped on these logs.
One of the statements from one of the kids as a grown-up really moved me, and it's such a small part of the film, but it was the way I've never heard it quite this way, where she said, we were communicating, telepathically, but then it just stopped. And the way that she, and you could tell that it impacted her back then, but today, that is one of her memories of that, is when it just stopped. Tremendous moment in the film.
It was at recess break, around 10:30 in the morning, and that is the bell rang at the end of recess, and that's apparently when the whole thing happened in broad daylight. And actually, I went to Africa, and I went to the school, and I met one of the teachers, Judy Bates, who's now the headmistress, and she revealed stuff that basically confirmed the whole event on camera, and more details off camera that she wasn't comfortable talking about. But the school bell rang, and that's when the encounter it had stopped. And people often say it was 66 children, but the teachers that I spoke to when I was there in Africa said there were about 100 children. It was just that 66 actually went on camera.
And it's kind of irony, right? Ironic. What a strange word with crazy definitions. But in this film, where we have two elementary schools featured And what are the odds of that? Two of the most incredible encounters, nearly, 30 years apart. I would say 1966, 1994. So about 30 years apart. But we're talking, of course, about Westall, 1966 in Australia. Another continent, right? A world apart. But the same situation here where we have a playground, a school full of children that witness this absolutely amazing event, and they're still here today as witnesses to talk about it. And take us through Westall. Again, how important of a case is this for the world to see? Most have never even heard about it.
I actually have Paola Harris to thank for that, because she is the one that grabbed me by the arm at a UFO conference and introduced me to this gentleman, James Rigney, an Australian researcher. And honestly, like, the response I have, and I feel terrible admitting this, but I don't believe it. When I first hear of like a landing case or a contact case, I'm highly dubious. Like,
you have to be. Sure.
Yeah, like how could this possibly have happened with that many witnesses in broad daylight and the whole world not know about it? And so I was like, oh, yeah, another landing. Okay, someone's just trying to jump on the bandwagon and get, But I started looking into it more and more, and then this gentleman, Shane Ryan, had done a film on it. I looked at that, and I thought, wait a minute. Wow, there's something here. And we ended up going to Australia for a month. And it was actually one of the few trips that I was able to bring my family with. It was great. And met with the witnesses and met with the school science teacher, which he'll have to remain nameless. But I had all the researchers in Australia that I met with. They're like, he'll never go on the record. We've been trying him for 50 years, or the better part of 50 years. And then this other gentleman took a photograph of what could be the same object just 17 kilometers away 2 days earlier, had taken a really color Polaroid picture. And, he won't go on the record either. Good luck. And I said, just get me in the room with these guys, okay? Let me do my magic. and miraculously, so you hear from the students, and then you hear from the science teacher who was also outside, who was an adult teacher, and then you see a photograph that a guy took 17 kilometers away of exactly what all the other students had seen. And it's such a compelling case.
That picture, I remember. That's right. I remember when you told me about the picture, right, like 3 years ago.
Yep.
And I want to see it. Well, I had to wait. Anyway, that moment in the film, and it's a Polaroid, which I really dig that part of it. When that picture went up on the screen, my jaw hit the floor. That's worth the price of admission right there, James. What did you think when you first saw the picture?
Well, it was so precarious, the whole situation of getting this guy. Again, we could do an entire radio show on just how that happened. And I had James Rigney and I believe I had Shane Ryan with me, and then we had a couple camera guys. And this guy had no intention of coming forward. He didn't want the attention. He didn't need the approval. He didn't want any of it. And when he pulled that Polaroid out of the envelope and handed it to me on a park bench, I think it was in Melbourne, I simply, that sound when you turn on your computer and it goes, and there's like a halo, Yeah. It was that moment for me.
It was so that's what was captured, right? Was that the first time you saw it?
Oh my God! Yeah, of course it was. I held it in my hand.
No, I mean in the film, that wasn't like a reenactment. That was the moment you saw it for the first time.
No, that was not a reenactment.
Well played. I mean, and Westall again. When you
I would have your listeners in stitches if I told you how it happened, but carry on.
Westall, like Ruwa, Westall is different than most other cases where you've got one or two people or, no eyewitnesses at all, no evidence. We're talking about, 100, 200 witnesses all there at the same time. And
More than that.
That's right.
More than that.
That's right. Pretty incredible.
The school teacher told me several hundred.
And the other part about Westall, I don't think you discussed this in the film, but is that the local television station, all of the original video and anything that was captured there,
the tape was in the archives, and the contents were empty.
And they're gone.
Gone.
They're gone.
Yep. I went on that TV show and I said, "You guys were there. You filmed everything." They said, "Yeah, we went to the archive. We took out the canister. It was marked. Contents gone."
Let's take a break here. We will be right back with our special surprise guest right after this short break. This is Fade to Black. Our guest tonight, James Fox. We're talking about his new film, The Phenomenon. So stay right there. We'll be right back. This is the Game Changer Network and KGRA, The Planet. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Follow me on Twitter at JChurchRadio. I'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight is our Phenomenon special event with director James Fox. Now, this is an important film, and it is getting ready for release. We're going to be talking about all of that, James. A very big deal. But now we are joined by this young man, Mr. Jacques Vallee. Jacques, good evening. How are you, sir?
I'm good. I'm getting younger and younger every time you say that.
You know, and you know, this is the thing, Jacques, and thank you for coming in and joining us tonight. And the community has such respect for you and your work and your books over the years. But here we are in 2020, Jacques. You know, this is many decades later of you pushing this forward, and we have this film today. How important do you think the phenomenon will be for the community and the world?
Well, I think it arrives exactly at the right time. There is a very high level of interest from the new generation. You know, I mean, the subject has gone through a series of waves, and it tends to fade away, and then a sighting or some sensational event brings it up again, and then there's a new wave of excitement, a new generation. The problem is that people see only one particular slice of it at one time, and this movie, because it goes into history and because it's done with such high quality, is going to really build a consensus about what the entire phenomenon is. You know, most people think of it as a military thing. I mean, we've all seen the movies, you know, Over the Nimitz and so on. Some people think of it as only an American thing. And James, in his movie, brings in all the other things. The military events are only maybe 10% of the whole phenomenon. The military is constrained by its locations and by its gadgets, which are very good. It's constrained to a particular type of observation. You know, a farmer in Kansas or a truck driver in France or in Russia is going to see something different. So the movie takes all of that into account. And let me tell you, the work that the team that James has assembled is of such high quality that people will be blown away when they see it.
And there's another aspect to this that I'm very excited about, and it's this. This is a theatrical release, right? This is in movie theaters across the country. where you're going to have the UFO community go out and see the film, but it's also going to be exposed to the country. And with that, you have to have those standards met for a theatrical release. It has to be cinematic. It has to sound wonderful. It's got to have all of that perfection in there. But this time, it's a UFO documentary, and we've got that going for us. How exciting is that for the world to finally have this out in front in a commercial sense?
Well, I don't think there has been anything like it in terms of a nonfiction presentation.
Mm-hmm.
There have been, as you know, tremendous fiction films made that were extraordinary, that tried to approximate what was really going on. But this is nonfiction, and I think it's going to grab people from the first, slides, and go on from there. But what's important to me, having had the privilege of working on it to some extent with James, is that what we see are the people. It's not just one case after another, like some of those documentaries you see on TV. The movie really goes into what happened to these people. Where did they come from? Who were they? How did their family, how did their neighbors react to what they saw and what they said? And I think people will react to just the human quality of it, which to some extent, is shown by documentaries. But again, the documentaries try to make a point about one case after another. This isn't it. This really tells the story from both a historical and a geographic point of view, and I think the impact is going to be very profound.
Well, you have always tried to push that part of it, the human element side of it, the psychological side, the emotional side, the impact that it has on individuals, not only with sightings, but possibly abductions and direct contact. And you're right. So much has been made in the past about what was the ship like? What was the ship like in the inside? What, the sensational sides of things, and always took the focus away from the human element and the impact it's had on individuals. Was this you pushing James to go in this direction, or was James already going there?
I think he wanted to go in that direction. I think what I brought, contrary to what you were saying earlier, I'm old enough to remember working actually with Dr. Hynek and meeting the people at the Condon Committee. We were, Alan Hynek and I were the first scientists to testify in Boulder before the Condon group. I remember going to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base to meet with the staff of Project Blue Book and Major Quintanilla and what happened there. So what I was able to contribute was that extra dimension of the human motivation, and also to some extent this is something that bothers me when I look at what's on TV, as good as it may be, but in some cases, but the motivations of the organizations behind it. I think the Air Force is not fairly represented in the whole history. There is a consensus that there was some sort of cover-up from the government, and that can be meant in a variety of ways. And there was reluctance at different times to deal with the phenomenon at all, or if they had to deal with it, to really get the scientific community involved. Well, I think this movie is going to get at least some of the scientific community involved. I can tell you in Silicon Valley, people are not waiting for permission to do something when they think there is some some discovery to be made, and that's not exactly public, but there are a number of scientists who are involved now, working with, more than ever, working with international friends and colleagues and trying to assemble the evidence, trying to look at it without asking anybody's permission. And, in Silicon Valley, you can do a lot of things without money because, equipment is available, and when people are interested, they'll work over the weekend, and, they'll work at night and will get the thing done and analyzed. And I think that's the spirit. And, I think the movie brings that up pretty well. So we're going to see some changes.
The film of the United Nations, which I had never seen before, by the way.
I had not either.
Yeah, watching that.
I had seen pictures and I had seen low quality, video, but I had not seen. I mean, it's extraordinary, and I know how much work went on by the team, by James' team, behind the scene to get this. It's remarkable.
Well, and
it's in color too.
It's in color, absolutely. It's what do they call it? The telecine. The conversion of film to digital is spot on for the film. It's really good. But let me ask you this, though, Jacques. When you go and you watch those scenes at the hearings for the United Nations, and you think about how long ago you and Lee Spiegel did that together, we're in 2020. Yeah, and we're in 2020. Did you expect us to be further along the road with the question of UFOs, or are we further than what you thought we would be?
No, I think we went in thinking that already at that time, the evidence, and I'm using that term carefully because it means different things to different people, but
sure.
The evidence was so strong. And, we had witnesses with us who were extraordinarily convincing, like Captain Coyne, who was involved in the helicopter case, that happened in Ohio. That when he told that story, the entire room was silent, was frozen. One of the delegates from one of the countries said, "Well, what did you do, Captain, when you realized you were trying to land and something was pulling you up?" And he said very calmly, "Sir, I closed my eyes and prepared to die." Okay, now this is a military man who knows that the situation is out of his control and that there is something that is pulling this large helicopter with these army officers who had just passed, by the way, a visual, an eye exam so they could continue to fly helicopters. So there is no argument that maybe they were chasing a flock of birds or something. This was real, and we thought that kind of testimony would impress at least some of the people. And the proposal that was made was not expensive. It was just to help coordinate the work that was already going on in a number of countries. As you know, I'm a member of the scientific advisory board for the French Space Agency on this subject, and that committee has existed since the 70s and continuously. So the interest is there by a number of countries openly, and what's needed now is a true coordination effort.
And another point, an extraordinary moment in the film is when the subject is brought forward by James with Metamaterials. And you, again, I'm not giving away anything from the film. Everybody just relax. But there is a shot with you holding 3 containers. and you start to discuss this. When we get into the metamaterials discussion, not only for the UFO community, but for the world in general, now we're taking a big step forward away from video, film, eyewitness testimony to something physical. So when we're talking about metamaterials, are we talking about small traces, granular materials, or are we talking about something that is larger and more tangible?
So, I don't want to evade your question. At this point, we are not sure of what we have.
Right.
Okay? Now, people have been talking about metamaterials, we're doing this. Look, we have this, we're going to study it, and so on. And we're the first ones doing that. That's not true. I mean, that research has been going on for 40 years. If you remember, there was an explosion of an object that has never been identified over Ubatuba in Brazil in 1957. Professor Sturrock at Stanford, who founded the Plasma Research Center in the physics department at Stanford, has done extensive study of that material. It had been studied by several other groups, and I brought back two more samples that were unknown at the time, one from Olavo Fontes, who was a primary researcher in Brazil at the time, and another one from an Argentinian sailor who was in Ubatuba and picked up some of the material. We have that now, so we have plenty of material, and we are retesting it, comparing it to the material that Professor Sturrock was kind enough to give me from his own collections. But this is difficult. This is difficult science. This is difficult technology, and it may lead to, pretty mundane results, although we already know the material could be made on Earth, but why would anybody do that in 1957? That particular material, we already know, and there are a number of publications about this in the scientific literature, again, going back 30, 40 years. So we are re-examining this, and that's what you do in science. We have new material from that case and other cases, and you just go over what has been done by your colleagues, and, we're standing on the shoulders of very, very good researchers who did that in their own time with very little money, but did it professionally, and that's what we'll continue to do. Now, if you're asking me, do I have, the control panel for a UFO from Alpha Centauri? Right. No, I can assure you if we had that, we would have a different conversation. We have intriguing materials, and we just have to do. But if you look at my website, Dr. Gary Nolan and I made a presentation which is on the website. I made that presentation based on our first analyses, and in Paris about 3 years ago. This was a private presentation. There were only about 200 people in the room it had not been advertised. Many of them were scientists. There was one man in his 50s who obviously came from one of the French academic labs, and he said, "This is fine, you're showing us some new stuff, some interesting isotopic analysis. You have to go beyond the component itself. You have to go to the level of the isotopes, which is difficult and expensive." He said, "That's good that you're doing this, but you only have 2 data points. You have to redo it with different instruments, with different beams, going to different places in the material before the scientific community will really look at it seriously." So he was right.
Yes.
And, that's what you do in science. You just don't have one measurement and you rush to the New York Times to announce a discovery. That's not the way it happens. So we want to do it right, and we want to invite, people who have that kind of material to contact us, and our colleagues, even the skeptics, may have some very good advice. It's a very specialized area.
Yeah. I had read, I'm going to make this really quick. This was about 3 weeks ago, that 70% of scientists and researchers, 70% cannot repeat their own experiments. Right? That's the way it is. You have to continue the testing. You can't just base everything on one set of results. That's what you have to do. I wanted to ask you this.
You have to compare it to what your colleagues have done. And by the way, some of that material we're going to make available to other labs in Europe. There are people who are ready to work on it, who are very competent and have the right instruments.
That's the only way it can be done. That's the only way. Jacques, I want to ask you this, and James is probably going to chuckle at this question, but it's a real one. You've been doing this for a very long time, and the critics out there have always pushed the issue of the world is not ready. I don't know what the world was like in 1970 and the feeling of things out there. I was only 8 years old. But today I feel that we are ready, that I think everybody's acclimated to it. Is the world ready? Are we going to freak out about the existence of UFOs and alien contact, or is it just going to be another day at the races?
I don't think it's going to be another day at the races. I think if you ask the witnesses, which I know you've done, they will tell you that this is not just some nice spacecraft, from Venus. This is profound. It is going to change a lot of things when we recognize it. It's hard to recognize, and we should not lead with our preconceived ideas of what it is. It's very complex. What has changed is that, in the 50s, 60s, there were reasons for the government to want to control the information. People probably would have freaked out. Some did. And there was a lot of little unknown from the strategic point of view and the military point of view. Is it a secret weapon that somebody has? What are why is it here? How come it can violate our airspace, ignore the radar, follow our rockets, follow our aircraft carriers? I mean, the Nimitz is not the first one, okay?
Right.
So there was, to some extent, a legitimate concern to keep it secret, actually, until there could be some determination. Well, we don't need to be initiated into those secrets to know that they haven't found anything. If they had found anti-gravity by now, we would not be trying so hard to get back to space. You realize that there hasn't been a rocket going into space from the United States carrying an astronaut in the last 8 years?
It's incredible.
It is incredible. And, I remember in my house, with my wife and my 2 kids 50 years ago, watching 2 guys, landing on the moon. But the fact that now when we go back to our unit, our module in the space station, you have to take a flight to Russia or to someplace close to Russia to use a Russian rocket to go there, and that we have not had the capability for 8 years to go to a space station that to a large extent we built is incredible. So if we had anti-gravity, I mean, this would not be an issue. We would not be talking about it now. So the problem has proven, I think, much more difficult than people thought. Scientists can be very arrogant. Give me a piece of that and I'm going to analyze it over the weekend and I'll tell you what it does. Well, that didn't work. It's a complex problem. You need to look at it in history, and I think James hired me because I'm old enough to remember some of the history, and I've also, as you know, done research in a more ancient history with a group of people who were passionate about that, and we've published a couple of books about that. So this is all. I've also, remember the presentation I made where you were kind enough to introduce me last year,
right,
about the use of artificial intelligence to screen that data, and we have those tools. And the presentation I made was about an AI program that I developed in 1985, okay? And there are people now saying, we're going to use AI one of these days. Well, AI has been available. I mean, that form of AI was already sufficiently developed in 1985 to be used to help in this research. Why didn't we do it? Okay, why are we just looking at it as a novelty when we have developed those algorithms to a sufficient point to start using them? They're not going to tell us exactly what UFOs are, where they come from, and so on, but they can help us save time and money in doing the research. We have that. And now we're not in 85 anymore, we're in 2020. And we have, I don't need to tell you, computers that are much more capable and software that's developed way beyond what we had then. The problem remains the same. We keep looking at the problem with better and better instrumentation, better and better software, better and better intelligence. That's what's changing. And I think to some extent the government and I think the intelligence community, the military community would relax if the scientific community stepped up and took over at least parts of the problem.
I wanted to ask you this. One of the things about you, Jacques, is that most, including myself, okay, I'll just go on the record, most people think that you've got knowledge and you know things that you can't share. So let's leave, I'm going to push that in the background for a second. But the other side of it is the government is sitting on actual data and facts and maybe debris and a crash saucer and maybe an alien body or two that they are not disclosing. What side of the fence are you on? Do you think that the government is sitting on that kind of information?
Well, you're asking me several questions here. I do have information that I have not shared. But that's different from having insight. Every scientist has, some deep, when you've looked at something for a long time, whether it's cancer or, galaxies or whatever, you develop some insights that you're just not sure of. You're not ready to publish them. You might discuss them with close colleagues, but you're not ready to go public with them. I think many of us in this field have such insights, and I think one of the things we should do is start sharing those insights.
Right.
But probably not publicly, probably not on a TV special, but just to compare notes. The other thing is we know for a fact that things have been recovered that and have disappeared somewhere. They may have disappeared in somebody's basement who's given up on studying it. But I have a lot of respect for people in that community. I think many of them are good scientists and they are curious, and they would have continued to work on it. There may be a good reason for them not to talk about it, because they don't see that was certainly true of the Air Force, by the way, when I was discussing it with Major Quintanilla and so on. They did not see in the scientific community anybody who was ready to start doing the research seriously. So they were sitting on data that they didn't know, how to give it to somebody. And I think that impression was reinforced by, the Condon study, which was a joke. So if that's what the scientific community does when you give them good data, that's pretty discouraging. And by the way, it wasn't just the Condon study. It was the New York Times. It was the Academy of Sciences. It was all of that. So if you were sitting in, why would you risk your career, as an intelligence analyst somewhere, or as a military officer with access to data, to a vault with materials? Why would you risk your career by going public with it when you know that the scientific community is going to laugh at it? That's what we have to change. And starting with the public, and again, that comes back to the movie.
Right.
So is there more data? Yes. On the other hand, many of these people are, in a basement somewhere, literally. They haven't done what I've done. I mean, I've gone to Brazil 4 times, extensively. I've gone to Argentina several times. I know France pretty well. And I've been in other countries in South America. I've gone to Russia 6 times. And I know the people who are doing the research there. And the data is available if you're serious. And you gain, what you have to gain is the trust of people. It's not a question of time and money so much. Money could help to some extent, but we've done a lot of stuff with no money. And if truth be told, a lot of great companies have been built here in Silicon Valley with no money, at least the prototype, including the transistor and the integrated circuit and things like that. And the money came once there was something in the lab that worked. But people had to spend their own time very often or risk getting fired by working on new ideas in Silicon Valley before they could get the money. I think what you need to do is gain the trust of your colleagues here and overseas and within the government, that you're serious and you're not doing this just to be regarded as some great scientist, but you're doing it with the hope to build a team and to get some results.
I want to thank you, Jacques, and also I'm going to let the audience know. Jacques said to me earlier today, James is going to be on with me, right? It's going to be great that the two of us are on together. James didn't say one word. Jacques, say hi to James.
What could I possibly say that's going to come on.
Well, I think he's shocked because you said I was this young guy.
Yes.
Now, James wanted me to work with him because I'm old. I know where the bodies are buried. I mean, in a symbolic kind of way. But I've worked with these people, so I know what they were thinking. I know. I mean, we've spent a lot of time working on Socorro, and of course, Dr. Hynek was at Socorro, and there were some strange things about what went on, who talked to whom, when, and so on. Well, if you don't know what actually happened there to the people, you're going to end up with a mystery and with lots of question marks. Well, I wasn't with him at Socorro, but I know what happened. I know what happened in Ann Arbor. I know what happened in the Michigan swamp gas case. I know I was part of all of that. So I think that's where my contribution can be.
Thank you so much,
I would like
John.
to just say really quickly,
Yes.
this film would not be what it is without Jacques' major contribution. And I really say that seriously. He was instrumental in putting the pieces of the puzzle together. Someone who didn't read about it, someone who was there, someone who knew Condon, who knew Dr. I'll think of his name in a second, but basically all the characters, Quintanilla.
Well, Dr. MacDonald, is
Dr. James
is in the movie, and I'm glad he's in the movie. I mean, you've brought many of these people back to life with their character and their thoughts and their passion, and I think that's what the movie is about.
Hey, Jacques, can I ask you?
Having Jacques in the edit room with us and helping us put the pieces of the puzzle together was just it was huge.
No, priceless is the word. Jacques, I want to ask you one question. With and maybe the answer is inside of this film. I do not know. Is there one case that stands out for you that you would want to have covered that has been ignored? Because, like with Ruwa and even Zamora and Socorro hasn't, had the attention to it, and Westall. But is there a case that you would like to see thoroughly brought forward?
Many people, ask that. Give me one case. Give me the best case, and of course, people always answer Roswell. And one case in science doesn't really mean that much. You can always come up. I mean, there are some extraordinarily rare things that happen that can change distort the whole picture. And what I've been trained to do, maybe because I'm a computer guy, I was taught physics, but I don't really remember most of the equations. I'm basically an information science guy, and an AI. My PhD was in AI. I look for patterns, and what's great about this movie is that yes, it goes into specific cases as illustration, and goes into many aspects of them that have not been seen before by people that are important. But what's important is what emerges from the pattern.
And what does for you? What is the key element that you're looking for in a pattern? Because with your books and the way that you have spoken about the phenomenon over the years, that there is an interdimensional aspect to this. There's something else here that is non-physical. There is the trace evidence left on bodies and people's faces, for instance. Are you looking for that kind of consistency from case to case that you're not necessarily speaking about, but you see it, and that convinces you that what had happened could be extraterrestrial?
Well, what you do in looking for patterns, and by the way, if you have, if you're getting 1,000 cases a month, you're going to be just looking for, and that's where AI can help you.
Right.
If there is a pattern that matches, for example, the moon rising through fog, or it matches what some new weapon can do, or it matches some common phenomenon that people wouldn't necessarily recognize, you can eliminate those cases and zero in on the ones that are truly unknown. Now, the ones that are truly unknown may, for example, for a long time, the statistics that we were looking for patterns of wave. of time analysis of the waves. And they were following the 26-month periodicity, starting in 1950, 1952, 1954, 1956, over those. Well, 26 months is the periodicity of Mars as seen from the Earth, the oppositions of Mars as seen from the Earth. So does that mean they come from Mars? Well, after that, the pattern breaks down. And it breaks down in 1957 at the time of Sputnik. Why? But when you look at the data, the people were not seeing Sputnik. They were seeing something in their backyard, and it wasn't Sputnik. So that look for pattern teaches you a lot about what the phenomenon is or is not. Then, you're left with the unknowns. And again, what you want is to begin to, at that point, any scientist who is not a complete idiot will realize with what he or she has, in the lab is an intelligence that can change, a little bit like the people who study dolphins. You play games. I remember John Lilly talking about dolphins, and the dolphin had to go to come and grab something within 20 seconds, to get some food, and that was a game that they had invented, and they were, giving scores to the dolphins if they did it right, and the dolphin would get some food. Well, after a while, the dolphins would swim to the end of the pool and sink to the bottom and stay there until second number 18, and then the dolphin would just fly out of the water and jump to the end and grab the food just before the 20 seconds. Well, that's when you know that this is not just a game, that the dolphin has gotten it, understands the rules, is playing with you, and putting you on the spot, essentially, by saying, hey, I know what you're trying to do, and I'm smarter than that.
Right.
Well, the UFOs are doing that.
Right.
Okay? Every time we think that we're going to really understand where they're going to go next, it doesn't happen quite that way. Or, the appearance changes, or the lights change, something changes. It's, to some extent, it's a game. So, you could be excused by saying maybe they are trying to teach us something. But there are things in the environment that can give that impression also of playing games with us. And this is where we need a lot of data, and that's where we need people who are trained to look at data and to look at this particular kind of data. And let me tell you, it takes 2 years. The idea that you can hire somebody who is, good at artificial intelligence and get a bunch of people and give them a bunch of reports and tell them to code the reports, and that the computer is going to give you an answer in 6 months, that's not true. It's just like intelligence, or it's just like learning a language and understanding the culture through learning the language. It's something that we need to train a cadre of people to come to grips with the phenomenon with no preconceived idea of what it is.
I have to ask you this. I can't let you go without going here.
I've got time.
Okay, let's do this. All of history until now, Jacques, all of history was the question of other planets out there beyond our solar system. Right? Would there be one? Would there be two? Would there be 10 in the Milky Way? Well, now, over the last 10 years especially, and over the last 5 years significantly, We now know that there are 1 trillion planets in the Milky Way, and that up to 100 billion of them are rocky, Earth-like planets. Now, that changes the game, doesn't it? Not only with the Drake equation, but with relieving the pressure on our brains, wondering if they could be out there.
Yeah, but it cuts both ways, Jimmy, because, where are they? If there are so many of them, why don't we see them? Or do we see them, or do we not see them because we're not looking in the right way? And by now, that's what the argument that I have with my friends at City. They say, by now it should be obvious. It's not obvious. It shouldn't be just some vague shape in the backyard or a light or, or even something flying over an aircraft carrier. It should be very clear. And we should have learned to recognize them. And so it seems, so you have the dissonance, a discontinuity that, yes, we know that there must be that many planets. We know that life cannot be that, strange and unique. There are different ways of getting an intelligent animal out of a bunch of chemicals. And nature is very rich in all the ways it can do that. So how come they're not here? Or are they here, but in a completely different form?
Or frequency.
And I think that's a challenge.
Right. Or frequency. They could be literally phasing in and out of our existence, not only with our vision, but our hearing and our world, right? I'm talking about a parallel situation where they are phasing in and out. So,
but those are, hypotheses. And now, to make something clear, Dr. Hynek, when he was teaching at Northwestern, when I was at Northwestern with him, was teaching the kids that any star, we were talking about classifications of stars, and, our sun is a G-type star and so on, that any slowly rotating yellow star like the sun had to have planets. That's why it's rotating slowly. And if it's yellow, it's probably kind of old and stable, and it's going to be stable for a long time. So any planets there are some will be too hot and some will be too cold, but there will be some that will be close enough to have water in liquid form. And once you have water in liquid form, there are all kinds of things that can happen in biology. And if you have a star that's stable, a single star, although now people are talking about double stars having planets, but that could support life. And I don't know, where we're going with that. But certainly there are enough single yellow stars just in our solar neighborhood to indicate that life must be, and he was teaching that. Okay, this was in the days when people were saying, well, life is probably very rare, so we should remember that there are some great teachers around.
As we move ahead, and this is the thing, as we move ahead, do you anticipate more cooperation from different state actors, and certainly within our own country, because they need to respond to the public's interest with films like The Phenomenon, that maybe we'll start to see that cooperation?
Well, if you look at the history of science and technology and so on, the government can do extraordinarily good things. In my career, I've been funded by both the National Science Foundation and by DARPA. But the incentive has to come. They're not going to knock on your door and ask you if you have, a bright kid who could enlist in 5 years of study so that he could discover X, Y, and Z. I mean, you have to discover it first.
Right.
You have to do the hard work, and sometimes with no support, and and then you discover something, or you become really good at doing something that other people want to join, and then the government with a major, capital G, may take notice, and if it matches something that they think could be useful to the economy or useful to knowledge in general, then you have a chance of getting funded. But, again, I believe in individual initiative and people who are brave enough to do this, at least to begin to exploit on their own and make all the mistakes along the way. And that's how you learn. And
One last question before I have to let you go is, it seems that France, United Kingdom, even Italy, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Mexico, these countries have been very open and willing to discuss this out in the open and not hide behind it. But the United States has chosen to not discuss it and almost ridicule the public on that, the opposite of these other countries that I've just mentioned. Is it because...
I hear that argument. On the other hand, I was given access to the Air Force files, which were 12,000 cases at the time, and I punched it into punch cards in those days, and I built my first catalog out of that with the blessing of the Air Force. I mean, there was, the only rule was to preserve the privacy of the witnesses, but the Air Force would have been delighted if more scientists had come. And at the time, I was a French citizen with a green card.
Mm-hmm.
I was not even a citizen. I only became a citizen when I worked at SRI in the early 70s. So the Air Force was quite open with the data. They obviously may have had some data that about weapons or anything else that they kept for themselves. But 12,000 cases, and I could work on them.
Hold on, Jacques. What were you saying, James?
I'm so sorry, guys. I didn't mean to butt in here, but Jacques, the one thing that bothers me about that statement is that, we go into great depth, obviously with your help, to Socorro. That was a landing case, one of the most well-documented first close encounters of the third kind in U.S. history. And then just 2 years later, there were, congressional hearings, there were statements by the Air Force in uniform saying that there was absolutely no evidence whatsoever to suggest that UFOs could be, visitors from somewhere else. And I just thought, wait a minute, didn't you guys just extensively research that landing case from a police officer in Socorro 2 years earlier? So clearly they were doing everything they could to keep that element of the phenomenon out of the eyes of the general public. So there was, in a sense, an effort to, I hate to use the word cover up, but
suppress. Yes.
Well, I used to have that discussion with Alan Hynek, and he sat me down and said, "Look, stop talking about the Air Force. There is no such thing. At different times, these people come and go in those positions. Typically, they are 2 years behind a desk, and then 2 years in Germany, managing a flight squadron, and then there are 2 years in some other place training pilots or doing something else. So the management comes and goes. the attitude of the public comes and goes. The fact that there was something at Socorro that they could not explain was known to everybody. It didn't mean that we were visited by anybody. It meant that there was something that we could not explain or would not explain. For a long time, we thought that this could have been an anti-gravity device. It could have been, I tracked down a company that was, very hush-hush, that was studying gravity. They had physicists, they had, and maybe they had built a prototype and it had to land there for a while and it took off again, I don't know. So there could be several motivations for that. I think at the time, to address your question specifically, I think the Air Force did not want the public to get too excited about this, because among other things, they were afraid of saturating their communication channels, and this was very much what the Robertson panel had recommended. And at the time, those recommendations were classified to calm the public so that there would be fewer reports. Because if there were too many reports through the military channels, it could saturate, and this almost happened at the time of the Washington flights, when Washington was overflown by a lot of things that could not be recognized, and the communication channels of the Air Force essentially were clogged by all the reports from their own people, from their own bases. So they really wanted to get rid of it, to be blunt, and I think that those statements were along those lines. And of course, the same thing happened with the swamp gas case.
Jacques, thank you so much. What an amazing conversation tonight, and I look forward to hanging out with you again, and of course, having you back on Fade to Black, where we can continue these conversations. And thank you for everything that you have done, and this community, again, extends their thanks to you. Thank you so much, Jacques.
Well, thank you, and gee, I look forward to seeing the movie now that, they've done so many good things to it. And I mean, I've learned a lot about the technology they are using after they finish shooting and assembling the movie. And it's just going to be amazing.
It is.
Visually and emotionally and everything else.
Jacques Vallee. Thank you so much, Jacques. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you for hanging out with us.
Thank you. You're welcome. James, I'll see you soon.
Bye, Doc. Bye. I look forward to it.
Right on.
Bye.
And I am going to go to commercial. As everybody has just noticed, I did blow through a commercial break, but it's Jacques Vallee and James Fox. And that's the way it goes. This is Fade to Black. More with James Fox after this short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Jacques Vallee. Uninterrupted for an hour. Doesn't get any better than that. Unless you got James Fox in the batter's box. And James, continuing on. Let's break down a couple of things that Jacques said. I wasn't going to interrupt, and I know what you were thinking too is Jimmy just going to continue? I blew through the commercial breaks, and we just
loved it.
I had to do it. I had to do it.
Did you hear me talking?
I didn't hear a peep. And
no, but what could I possibly say to add to that conversation?
Okay, let's break down a couple of things. He said while I was taking notes, he said one thing that absolutely floored me, and it didn't get past the audience. I was watching them on Twitter. And he said, of course, the government has crash retrievals. When you hear Jacques Vallee say something like that, what's going through your mind?
The conversation I had with him off the record.
Right.
When you said, "Are there things that you know, Jacques?" all I could think of is that I asked him the exact same question in private.
I have too. And his answers, you know what? And I don't want to say things to the audience that are uncool. Look, when you have private conversations with people, you have to respect that. They have to stay private.
Jacques still has a top secret clearance.
That's right.
Or he has. I know he has security clearances still because he had brought those up with me on a couple of occasions because I asked him to talk about ATIP. And he had briefed members of the Senate on that project. During that project, I believe he said he still held a classification. But anyway, yeah. So, yeah, Jacques. Let's just put it this way: Jacques knows.
He does. He does, and that's I have to ask him that question, as difficult as it may be for me to ask that, but it's a question that needs to be asked, and the audience has to hear the answer, whatever it may be. And being able to go there with Jacques, look, he has, I think, a great respect for the community, and he has certainly rolled the dice and pushed this question and committed a life to this, and hearing his answer, whatever it may be, comes from a place of respect, and it was just amazing. Now let's go back to Socorro for a second, and you're absolutely right. Okay, and the way that you presented that to Jacques is an honest. Is an honest question. It needs to be asked because Hynek. Now you've researched this enough, but Hynek was on the scene like the next day, right? He literally was at the.
So here's the. Yeah, totally. And here's the thing that Jacques didn't mention tonight that I found fascinating, and that was. During that period in 1964, just before Socorro happened, Jacques was bending the ear of Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who we all know that was the scientific advisor to the Air Force Project Blue Book. And Jacques was saying, look, he had just finished cataloging all these cases in France from the 50s of close encounters. And so Jacques was telling Hynek, look, you need to look under these unexplained cases under the category of psychological. And his reasoning was, there are a lot of cases in Project Blue Book where you have close encounters, but they're quickly dismissed and they're labeled and categorized as psychological because it's just too much. It's one thing to talk about unidentified craft in the air, something totally different to talk about beings on the ground. And while Jacques was going through this whole thing he was actually at Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, with Jacques, which was the headquarters for
Blue Book,
Project Blue. Headquarters for Project Blue Book. I think it was like a day later, the landing happened at Socorro. So the irony of the whole thing and the synchronicity and timing is just phenomenal. And it's one of the things that we uncovered when we were with Jacques. So Jacques, painstakingly walked us through what was happening in the Air Force at the time, what was happening with Dr. Hynek. Hynek's 180 started to occur. That was one of the cases that really profoundly affected Hynek because of the caliber of the witness and all the evidence that was left behind at the scene. We dug into that case for 5 years. I mean, I went to the National Archives, and funny enough, everyone's like, "Oh, you really want to know a lot more about this case? You talk to Ray Stanford, who wrote the book Pentagon Pantry, Saucer in a Pentagon Pantry, something like this. Sorry, I can't remember the exact title of it. You got to go there. And when I went to interview Ray Stanford about it, I spent like a week at his house with him, and he has amazing accounts of that, how he investigated thoroughly. I tried to get him to go to the National Archives, and he wasn't having any part of it. He's like, oh, God, everything that was to be discovered has already been discovered. It's going to be a complete and utter waste of time. Long story short, I said, well, if that's the attitude you're going to have, then I'm going without you. And he said, okay, fine, I'll go. But I'm going to take my own car because after 10 minutes, I'm going to be thoroughly fed up and I'm going home. Well, long story short, we got the original Project Blue Book file, the original copies, not photocopies, originals, not the scans, not the microfilm, originals. It was like when they rolled those out at the National Archives, we had our little white gloves on. It was unbelievable. And to see the level of documentation and evidence and diagrams and photographs and all the effort that they went through the Air Force to try and provide a prosaic explanation for that case, right down to the footprints of the creatures, directly corresponding to the eyewitness testimony where they were standing in relation to the space, to the craft that was landed, and the imprints of the landing gear and all that stuff. And then to see the Air Force, Quintanilla, Hynek, 2 years later at the congressional hearings and giving statements, you see it. It's plain and simple. They were covering it up, period. And I hate to use the word cover up, and I know that Jacques doesn't like to use that word either, but that's what they were doing. There's no question about it.
Do you think, listening to Jacques' answer and attitude about it, he felt that he just said it, that they were cooperating with me. They were being cool with me. Is that a method of operation where they are going to make Jacques comfortable, right? And they would handle somebody else a little bit differently to make them comfortable too as well. Maybe not cooperate. Right, I don't know what. Wouldn't you want someone as intelligent as Jacques on your side? That's what I'm saying.
Wouldn't you want him in the fold? I would.
Yeah, you would have to. You would have to.
I mean, come on, man. The guy is like a genius. So he thinks he's like 10 steps ahead of everybody else.
I wanted your take on this in your research with Socorro. And for me, it's always stuck out, and I don't think that there's been enough focus on it. But that's the symbol that was on the craft.
Yes.
That symbol, through my research over the last 30 years, I have seen that symbol around the world from other eyewitnesses that have described the exact same thing, almost a similar craft too as well, that probably didn't know anything about Socorro. What do you make of that, and what have you found out?
Okay, so Socorro, Saucer in a Pentagon Pantry, that's the name of Ray Stanford's book. And Ray, 50 years ago, had said, look, there was an obfuscation. They deliberately and intentionally misled the public and put out a different symbol so they could quickly identify a false claim of citing the same craft.
Right.
Total valid reason for doing that. And I thought it was a good idea. But Ray was like, no, that's not the right symbol. It's not the right symbol. And I think people doubted him. When I went to meet with Lonnie Zimora's family, his wife, Mary, his daughter, Diane, his son, Michael, his co-workers, the local sheriff from the 70s, they all had clarified to me that was one thing that he said that they asked him to do. One was downplay the beans. If you can just not talk about the beans altogether, that'd be great. And the other thing was the symbol on the craft. Lie and say it was something else. Draw something different. And when we were, and no one's really had definitive proof of what the symbol was, other than they'd heard accounts of it from Lonnie before the Air Force arrived, or the military arrived about an hour or so after the incident. The plants were still smoldering from the heat. No one had known, other than his description of what it was an inverted V with 3 lines, what it actually really looked like until we found the document in the National Archives. There's a photograph of it online. I think it's Ray Stanford and Socorro symbol, but we found it in Dr. Hynek's own handwriting.
And
so yeah, the real symbol was an inverted V. It looks like an A with 3 lines, 2 on the inside and 1 on top. That's the real symbol.
Have you seen that symbol replicated?
No, I haven't. No, I personally haven't, and neither has Jacques. I gave Jacques the document, and he's done extensive research, and he hasn't either.
The other part is the beings. And
yes.
Now you touch upon I want to go back to the National Archives. Okay, what's presented in the film, everybody check that out. Okay, that's one aspect of it. But going back to the National Archives, what did they have there when it came to footprints? Did you see original photographs of the footprints? What did they look like? What were the size of them?
Here was one thing that I was dying, because when we got the original file cabinet, that they rolled it out on wheels of all the original documents. I mean, Ray and I couldn't believe it. I mean, we simply couldn't believe it. It was like pinch yourself moment. And out it came, and there goes the halo and the sound of oh, as it rolled out.
Right.
And in there, and I actually, about an hour into it, I had to go out and get a flatbed scanner because we had very limited time, and it was a very time-consuming process. Pulling one document out, putting a placement holder in its place, going over to the photocopy machine. No, we had to go get a scanner. I had to get a flatbed scanner. And I went back up to the front desk, and I said, gosh, while we're at it, could we have, 52 and da-da-da? And they said, sir, actually, we made a mistake. We were not supposed to have given you the originals. However, since you have them in your possession, you can have them till closing time. So I went and got a flatbed glass scanner, and we just rapid fire went through it and scanned those documents. And what we came across was one of the first military men on the scene had done diagrams of the landing site. And some of the eyewitness testimony that I'd talked to said that you could clearly see in the sand next to the landing gear imprints, footprints, little paw prints, small. There were small footprints right next to, right next to the craft and those were all documented clearly in the film. I mean, you saw the section on Socorro. You saw the diagrams.
Yes.
Yeah, there was clear as day. I mean, they documented the footprints that corresponded to the exact location where Lonnie said he saw beings. In fact, there was so little information on the beings because that was an aspect of the encounter that the Air Force really wanted him to downplay for obvious reasons. When I went to Lonnie's house, and then again, it's a whole story on how I met his wife and how I befriended her and we became very close. It's such a long story. I got to access Lonnie's personal archives, and Lonnie had cut out all these details of the encounter with the beings of newspapers that were printed within the following day or two of the incident before they could tamp down that aspect of the encounter. And Lonnie had cut those out and kept them in his personal archive. And that's why you see descriptions in the newspapers about the encounter. And Lonnie made eye contact with one of the beings that turned and looked at him and was startled when because Lonnie thought it was an overturned car, thought it was a couple of children initially. And it's just remarkable to see that. And the fact that he had those in his personal archives, because you won't find those newspaper articles anywhere now.
How tall were they?
They were little. He described them as children.
Right.
Childlike, small, 4 feet.
Can you describe those footprints, what you saw at the National Archives?
Yeah, they were just small. They were just a few, 4 inches, 5 inches. And it looked like, from the diagrams, that there was I'm guessing they didn't say this, but it looked like there was a ladder or some sort of, and they stepped out and onto the ground. They took a couple steps in both directions, and that's when Lonnie rolled up.
Right.
And they got back inside and left. And Lonnie, when he first stopped the vehicle, he was a couple hundred yards away from from the craft and the beams. And when he drove further and got out, the craft was still on the ground. He got within 50 feet of the craft. That's when he had a good sighting of the symbol.
One of the most interesting points that Lonnie described for me was when he says that the craft, they get back on board, they fire it up, they rise up, and it sits there for a while. It's above the ground. And I think he said it was like 30 feet, right? 40 feet off of the ground, and then took off. Very interesting observation. And I always felt that, it was honest, and but it was not how other people would describe a fantasy, right? There would be something else more, fiction-based.
If you go to the landing site, which I've done many times, and you look at where they landed on the outskirts of town in this little gully, arroyo, it's like if you had to land and you wanted to minimize the likelihood of being seen, that's where you would have landed. They picked the perfect spot to be out of sight.
What do you make of staying with Socorro, the description of the craft? Again.
Well, it reminded me of the Tic Tac.
Yeah, I knew you were going to go there. Okay, let's say Tic Tac-ish, right? But up to that point, the eyewitness, the things that were being seen across the country, didn't have this description to it. Right? The Lonnie Zamora incident.
They were egg-shaped.
Was singular, exactly. Right? Very interesting.
One of the things, David Marler, the Marler Archives, the film wouldn't be what it is without David Marler. He turned us on to, there was a major landing wave that happened in and around Texas in 1957, and we cover some of that in the film to demonstrate that there were very credible people, police officers included, and people at Holloman Air Force Base that witnessed egg-shaped crafts that were landing. And we show some of those in the film, and when Lonnie was, I don't want to use the word interrogated, but practically they pulled him in and they spent into the wee hours of the night talking with him. Lonnie had explained that the military had said to him, these craft have been seen all around this area. And if you look at Socorro, as the crow flies, Holloman Air Force Base is a stone's throw from Socorro, New Mexico. In fact, one of the things that I uncovered was an article by Coral Lorenzen. I don't know if I pronounced her name correctly, but there was a couple of articles that she had written about a landing case that's featured in UFOs Past, Present, or Future with Emenager and Sandler.
Right.
It was done in the 70s.
Right.
That alleged landing that happened at Holloman where the occupants got out.
Right.
Well, that was right around the same time Socorro happened. And there were witnesses. Because I was researching Socorro and I was reading all the stuff I could possibly get my hands on, and I came across inadvertently some articles that Corral and Lorenzen had written about the landing at Holloman, and there were witnesses both in the air and on the ground. And it validated that landing case as well. And look, if you're willing to accept that Socorro, New Mexico, was extremely well documented close encounter of the third kind. In other words, the eyewitness, who's in Lonnie's case is a very solid eyewitness, reported beings associated with the craft. It wouldn't be that much of a stretch to assume that landing, which wasn't far away from Holloman, maybe there was some activity at Holloman they were observing, maybe not, I don't know. Not far from Trinity site as well, where we detonated the first nuclear weapon, atomic bomb. So the likelihood of them having cameras on that, maybe it happened. I mean, I would never in a million years would have thought that I would be saying this. That infamous Holloman landing case where the occupants get out and it was all filmed. I looked into that quite a bit. Talked to Emenager. I talked to Alan Sandler about it. I've seen videotapes of the guy that was working at Norton Air Force Base at the time that claimed to have processed that film footage. So maybe they are maybe the government is sitting on footage of an event like what Lonnie Zamora saw in Socorro.
Let's take a break right here, James. I'm going to keep you over for overtime since we had Jacques on for a full hour. I'm going to go to a break right here. I'm going to ask you to stay right there, and let's continue this, because when we come...
Roger that.
Yeah, yep. And when we come back, I got to talk about that B-25 pilot. That floored me. I want to know your reaction. This is Fade to Black. We'll be right back after this short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, director James Fox. Our The Phenomenon special event. We had Jacques Vallee for a full hour. That was pretty amazing. And now to continue on to go into some overtime, I do want to mention, James, that you are going to be at the Star Works conference in Laughlin with Ms. Harris. And that's going to be pretty cool for you to be able to, for the community, have the film play for them and get their reaction.
It's so funny. I've been getting a couple of messages. I mean, things are pretty intense right now, as you can imagine, with the rollout of the film. And I've been getting, they said, "Oh, you're going to be at, this conference." I'm like, "I am?" No, I'm like, "Yes, I will be there." But there was somebody else that was saying, "Oh, you're going to be at this other UFO conference." I'm like, "Really?" I didn't realize that. No, I am going to be, and it's going to be a lot of fun to connect with people. I've been kind of avoiding, for the most part, not entirely, going to them, because I feel like my efforts are much better and my time is much better off spent getting the film done, for obvious reasons. But now that the film is almost delivered, we're just like 10 days away. It's going to be fun to share it with the community and talk about the process of making it. Yeah. That's yeah.
Now, I wanted to. Okay, I'm going to ask you this question, and do not give me the generic answer and say all of it. Don't do it.
I have a question for you. I have to be honest with you. If you wouldn't mind, before we go to this, could you just tell me right now, what did you think of the movie?
Okay.
You got to watch it.
Yes,
it's got to be on people's minds. What did you think?
What I thought that it was nearly perfect. Okay, and now that's a politician's answer, right? That it's nearly perfect. For me, because I have my favorite cases, and two of those cases that I think absolutely need more attention are here, and I'm so happy about that. And I'm talking about Westall and Rua, Zimbabwe. And for me, in a personal way, I wish that there was more of those two cases there, but you can't do it. It's only one film, right? So there's that part. Now, that being said, I thought that I did nothing but learn so much that I didn't know before. And James, that's tough for a person like me to go through, because I see all the stuff. I just like you.
Yeah.
But this time around, it wasn't the case, where I was able to just sit and learn and be engaged. Now, putting all of that aside, the most important aspect, I think, for this film that I was most impressed with is the visuals and the cinematography. The music, the final edits and graphics are icing on the cake. But visually, it is stunning. And when everything else is done, the magicians in color correction have their way, and the music and the 5.1 and Dolby and all of that, that's just going to improve what I've already seen. So you have a lot to be proud of, and I have no issues with standing behind this film. It's that good. Man. Okay. Now that you got
No,
that
I
out
really,
of me,
I love hearing that because they're, this is, you're one of the first handful of people that's gotten to see it, and I see. It's hard for you not to. It's hard for me as a filmmaker when I see negative responses on threads, and I'm always told not to read them. But sometimes I see all the same old rehashed bullshit.
right?
And it really, I work so hard
Not to do that.
Idea,
right.
So hard to dig up never before seen archival footage.
Right.
I could make a documentary on just finding the stuff that we found.
Right.
I swear to you, I'm not kidding you.
Right.
And so I get so frustrated. I'm like, no, you have no idea what you're talking about. And that's why someone who's seen it, I'm asking you, what would you say to that person?
Yeah, you know what? And you'll be able to, and I can confidently say that you're going to silence all of that BS. And that's pretty cool. You've got this in your back pocket now, and you can just kick back and enjoy the ride that is about to happen. And having a nationwide theatrical release and this kind of approach to a documentary, like Jacques said, right? This is nonfiction. This is nonfiction. Yeah. This is a whole different way to handle this kind of release, and I'm excited about that. Getting back to it, now this was my question to you, and I don't want to hear you say all of it. If there's one thing in the film that you want people to pay attention to, one specific case, one specific moment, what would you have that be? Harry
Reid sipping that water as he contemplates responding to my question.
Yeah, that was pretty intense, actually. He was uncomfortable, man. That was, yep.
I saw him. Yeah. I asked the question. I felt uncomfortable kind of asking it, but I had to ask it. And he takes a sip of water, puts the cap back on, and drops the bomb. Yes, he does. I agree with you there. That was a pretty strong moment. Because it's a confirmation at a very high level of government, what we all suspected. Yeah, I know. I can't wait for the music. Dun dun dun. So and the I was like, man, in fact, I said to the music composer, this guy Christopher Hogue, he's amazing, and he's been putting his heart and soul into composing this. And I said, Chris, when that drops, I want them to feel it in their bones. Yeah, it's a pretty good moment. Now, okay, so for me, it's that pilot. That's the pilot, and listen, one of the most important witnesses that we can hear from are pilots, because we are talking about professional observers. They may be flying a plane, but they got to watch, right? That's what they do, right? It's their job. Mm-hmm. Yep. Professional observers. And Fravor, we've all heard from him. He's great in the film, and his description of what's going. That's why it's so riveting, because, these are professional pilots, right? That pilot, in that World War II scenario mindset, for him to give the color commentary of his encounter and what he saw, absolutely spellbinding. What did you make of that? Well, remember this. Remember that it's not just a pilot. He was a colonel in the Air Force, and he was later put as public spokesman for Project Blue Book, Colonel William T. Coleman. So the irony is this guy has he's a World War II pilot as well. Right. He has a dramatic encounter in a B-25 in 1955 over Alabama with an unidentified flying object, a disc. He's with engineers from Lockheed Martin and Boeing in the plane with him. And the duration of the encounter lasted roughly 9 minutes. It started off somewhere around 9,000 feet elevation and ended up at what he described as maximum continuous power at treetop level. And at one point, he told me that he had to take evasive action because they thought they were going to collide with the flying saucer. They were going to overtake 40, 50, it. Right. 30, 40, 50 feet off the ground. They were so close to the trees at chasing this thing that in order for him to take a right-hand turn to avoid hitting this thing, as though he thought he was going to hit it, he had to lift up on the controls, pull the plane up, and then dip a wing. That's how low he was. So when when I decided to do the recreation, I actually turned to my DP, this guy David West, and I said, Dave, during the interview in Florida at Colonel William T. Coleman's house, I said, Dave, this is going to be the opening scene of the whole movie, and we're going to rent a B-25. Of course, didn't have any resources to do that at the time, but I was hell-bent this is going to be it. And because not just it was a very unambiguous encounter, because a lot of times you hear, oh, I saw this like weird light. No, man, this guy came within feet of colliding with a flying saucer at treetop level. It's so dramatic. And then the fact that he became public spokesman for Project Blue Book, the Air Force's UFO investigatory arm, is just incredible. And I remember when we first got started with the film, I kept saying to this investor, this guy Larry, I said, we gotta go to Florida. We gotta interview this guy, Colonel Coleman. He's like, cool your jets, man. We're gonna get there. I was like, we'll formulate a plan. We'll get a budget together. I'm like, no, we gotta go now. Like, this guy's 90 years old. We gotta go now. And I just raised hell about it. I would not let up. And finally, he's like, all right, just go. And I went out there, and of course, he died like months later. So the fact that we got that on camera, documented, and then we rented a B-25. Lee Spiegel helped find that plane for actually a day, and then we ended up doing a follow-up shoot to pick up some pickup shots. I love that scene. I love that opening. I think it's amazing. I'm really proud of it.
Now, here we are, man, with the obvious question. I keep repeating this, but it's reality. This is 2020, and things have progressed, and you have been making films and working on this for so long. But here we are, man. It's 2020. You've got this film that's about to get released. Are we getting close? Are we getting close to this? Are we gonna get to this maybe this year?
I got a phone call. It was very encouraging from our distributor today. They said that the response from the drop of this trailer and the announcement of this film has been so welcomed. It's excited so many people, and the articles and that they went from 700 theaters to 1,300 theaters today. That they're going to be playing the trailer for 2 months, just about 2 months prior to the release of the film. So this is very encouraging. I think that it's our time. I think that, look, if the government's not going to do it, we're going to do it for them. There's no question in my mind, and maybe you feel differently, but this film, the people that have seen it, very skeptical people that I've invited into the edit room, they don't say, oh, I don't think this is real. They say, oh, that's why. Maybe that's why they're here. Oh, that's what it's all about. Oh, I see.
Right.
So I think that it's the case that we make, and I don't want to come across as someone that's prophesizing to come join my cult of believers. It's not where I'm at all. I look at it more that there's people that are informed on what's been going on and people that are uninformed. And I think this film is going to lead people to be in the category of informed.
The amount of times where you have gone through some pretty intense frustrations, right? You've walked away, right? You've walked away. And, but here, after deciding to come back at this once again and take another crack at it, and because it is so important, that speaks volumes. But where did you find the energy? Because when you decided to, virtually walk off the set of your TV show, and I did this, I can't do this, to where you are now, how easy was it to come back and continue the fight?
not easy at all. I look back at how hard this fight was, and I don't even I think that if I'd known, I kind of knew, had a little bit of a hint, but how difficult this was going to be. I'm not kidding. I don't want to sound like I'm exaggerating here. I'm really not exaggerating. I thought I was going to die making this movie. I pushed myself to right on the edge of the envelope. I pushed myself so hard. I thought I could die. I really did.
Right.
I thought I was dying. I've never worked so hard in my life. And I did it because I felt like this is our time, and this might be the last opportunity. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. I don't know. But I was all in on this one, and I really mean that. The only people that are really close to me know how much I put into making this movie happen. It was a colossal undertaking, begging and pleading for money, constantly running out, partners that failed, and keeping the thing alive. I mean, it's a miracle. That's all I can say. It's a miracle.
Thank you so much, James. And I can't thank you enough. And I'm just going to announce to everybody now. I was going to hold off, but I think it may be out. Today is Thursday. But James, let me tell you how much energy this guy's got. We just did tonight's show. In 2 nights, he is going to be joining me once again over on Coast to Coast AM, and we're going to do it all over again. And that's how important this film is.
I could talk for 24 hours straight. I'm making it easily. There's a story to every single picture, interview, archived piece of material. I'm not kidding you. It's unbelievable. The backstory to this film should be a film on its own.
I hope you did shoot some behind-the-scenes documentary footage. Tell me.
I did.
Okay.
I did.
Yeah, All right. Well, enjoy the rest of your evening, James. Thank you so much. The trailer can be seen over on our YouTube channel. We've got the links up on all of social media. Go and check out the trailer for The Phenomenon. The release will be in September, correct?
Yeah, it was going to be in June, but honestly, I missed the delivery date, and I did it for good reason. I knew it was going to be released in theaters, and I opted to extend the delivery date because I hired an 8-time Emmy Award-winning sound engineer to do the sound from start to finish, which had taken him 6 weeks. And there's a composition guy that's putting his heart and soul into composing music for this entire piece from start to finish. And unfortunately, the version that you saw, Jimmy, wasn't any of that. Neither was the color correction. So the version that's coming out is going to be 10 times better than what you saw.
I can't wait. James, get some rest, and you're going to need it. We'll be live on Coast in about 48 hours. Thank you so much, James. My best to the family.
Bye.
James Fox. The links are up on our website. They're up all throughout Twitter. And the film is The Phenomenon, and it is all of that. I do want to thank Jacques Vallee, too, as well. I am your host, Jimmy Church. I'm going to go and relax for 24 hours and then go get to work over at Coast to Coast AM. Fade to Black's executive producers, Rita Camurian. Shows produced by Hilton J. Palm, Renee, Dennis, and Bob. Announcers are Steve Harder, Gene Vitola, Mark D. Kovar. Webmaster is Drew the Geek. Music, Doug Aldrich. Intro, Spaceboy. SpaceboyMusic.com. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network. Syndication is KGRA, The Planet. This broadcast is owned and copyrighted 2020 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black or the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. I'll see everybody Saturday over at Coast. Until then, be safe. Go Beckley Teppy.